think it's very, very important right from the very beginning to point out to you, ladies and gentlemen, that this program, the Sukuma program, is funded by Johan Rupert. It is a privately funded program. It is not a government funded program. So while business partners, who are in fact the organization which is responsible for the administration of the program, are administering the program, it is not a government funded program. It is not accountable to government in any way whatsoever. In fact, in this instance, government is accountable to Johan Rupert personally for how they are managing his funds. We are aware of the fact that the Oppenheimers, both the Oppenheimer Trust as well as the Oppenheimer daughters, have also made similar contributions, but not insofar as this program is concerned, but really in terms of research and PPSs and other kind of assistance, which is obviously required during this time of COVID. One of the questions I did get asked earlier is, if the money runs out, what will happen? Well, I anticipate that with the success of this fund, and it is highly likely to be an extremely successful operation, I anticipate that with the success of the operation, there will be, first of all, additional donations, and I anticipate also matching funding eventually from government, particularly if the lockdown is extended. Right. So the Sukuma Relief Program is managed by business partners. It's sponsored by Johan Rupert. The things you need to know about the program: it is funded out of that 1 billion donation. It is unlike government-funded relief programs where there is no race-based criteria for qualifying in the Sukuma program. Now, at the moment, all of the announced government programs, and in fact, there is only one implemented government program, which is the SME funded program for the supply of product, essential goods into hospitals, etc. That program, in fact, has had attached to it a 51% black-owned requirement, whereas this Sukuma program has no such requirement. There is no race-based criteria for qualifying. If you are a small business, a PTY, a sole proprietor in distress, there is no race-based criteria for qualifying. This fund is limited to small businesses operating as sole proprietors, closed corporations, companies, and trust. While the documentation and the rules so far do not specify what a small business is, you can take it that the standard definition in South Africa is that a small business is a business that is doing less than 50 million rand, 50 million rand turnover a year. That's a definition that comes out of the BBBE scorecard, and it's a one that is generally used. However, I would imagine that the administrators of the trust, be it business partners as well as Johan Rupert, might at some stage change that definition, although it hasn't been defined, it hasn't been changed at this moment in time. Beneficiaries can qualify for a financial assistance grant and also for an aid loan of up to 1 million rand. So this is critically important. The Sukuma program is one which is releasing two things into the small business market, the market doing less than 50 million rand a year turnover. The first thing it is releasing into that market is a grant of 25,000 rand that we will talk about. And the second thing it is releasing are loans from 250,000 rand up to 1 million rand, and we will talk about those as well. There is a distinction between the benefits which are available for sole proprietors and the benefits that are available for companies, closed corporations, and trusts. So we're going to deal first with sole proprietors. Sole proprietors being individuals conducting formal business in your personal capacity, such as personal services, consulting operations, often employing more than 2 people. But that's not a requirement. The business is registered with the relevant authorities in terms of a business license and tax. So you would be registered to pay tax. You might even be paying VAT, but you are a sole proprietor at the end of the day. There are not too many sole proprietors around because most of those businesses, for a variety of reasons, will have been registered as companies. However, for those who do remain as sole proprietors, there is a definite benefit for you in this program. And what is that benefit? It is a 25,000 rand grant offered per qualifying business to be used for paying your overheads. The sole proprietor must provide evidence of financial activity before the COVID-19 outbreak. In other words, before the lockdown. 3 months bank statements of the business, because essentially they need to assess your operation before lockdown. Copy of your ID, copy of your business license. If you have a business license, it's not a requirement as a sole proprietor that you have to have a business license, but you have to have evidence of the fact that you're trading, and then obviously a tax clearance certificate. Michael Block says, does this apply to non-profit organizations? Well, again, Michael, the regulations are silent when it comes to whether or not non-profit organizations are included. The reality is, what I would recommend to you is you make an application. Your application document will show your registration as an NPO, and they will then come back to you. There is absolutely no statement that has been made publicly which excludes non-profit organizations and non-profit companies from making an application in this regard. The fact that trusts are also included as potential beneficiaries gives you an indication that within NPOs, trusts do exist, and therefore, by definition, NPOs might also be considered, although I cannot obviously talk on behalf of any of the people that are responsible. Is SARS processing tax clearance applications? Craig, yes, SARS is processing tax clearance applications. There are elements of SARS that are regarded as essential services, and they are still operating. So the sole proprietor must provide evidence that it's registered and up to date with tax requirements. The sole proprietor must provide evidence that it is in regulatory compliance with statutory authorities, bargaining councils, and all other compliance requirements which it may be subject to, including having paid skills development levy, unless it's exempt, unemployment insurance fund, and PAYE. Quite frankly, if you have an accountant, if you have an auditor, then letters from your accountants and auditors will go a long way to establishing the fact that you have regularized your affairs sufficient for you to qualify for this grant. If your type of business does not have a license, no problem, Raul, no problem, because if you have all the other documentations, you do not have to be licensed if you're not required to be a licensed organization. Payments will be made within 7 working days of your application. So where you apply for a grant of that 25,000 Rand, you will be paid that 25,000 Rand. If your application is successful and all your documents are in place, you will be paid within 7 working days of you applying. In other words, a week and a half. Within 7 working days of you having applied, you will get a grant of 25,000 Rand. The 25,000 Rand grant is not repayable. I'm going to say again, because I received a number of questions on this, it is not repayable. So ladies and gentlemen, you are not required to repay that 25,000 Rand grant. However, beneficiaries of the financial aid are encouraged to pay it forward and to repay as much of the grant to the public benefit organization created for this initiative as you can afford. So you're not asked to repay, but it is recommended that if at some stage you can afford to repay, pay it back into business partners for this specific program, because the money will then be used to provide financial aid to other business owners in need in the future. This is really an honors-based program. It is saying that Johan Rupert is saying, I recognize you're in need. We're going to give you 25 grand to help you overcome the lockdown period. If you get back, please God, when you get back on your feet, try pay it back, and try pay it back so that this program can continue. No business loans will be offered under the Sukuma program to sole proprietors. So the only thing which is available to sole proprietors is the 25,000 Rand grant, and no industries are excluded from receiving the 25,000 Rand grant. So it doesn't matter what industry you work in, you qualify for that 25,000 Rand grant. And I think that that's an important consideration for everybody to understand. There is a link to the online application process, which I have included on this slide, and I will make the slides available to everybody who is on the invitation link here, as well as on the COVID-19 site, our WhatsApp group, as well as the SITA, South African Independent Tenants Association group as well. Let's move on. So closed corporations, companies, and trusts, closed corporations, companies, and trusts, and for guidance purposes of businesses which are doing less than 50 million rand turnover, which is how we are for the moment defining small businesses, unless there are additional regulations or rules introduced either by business partners or directly by Johan Rupert. But as things stand at this moment in time, it's for those companies which are doing less than 50 million rand turnover. First of all, these companies applying will qualify for the 25,000 Rand non-repayable grant. So the first thing to emphasize for closed corporations, companies, and trusts is that you will qualify for the first 25,000 Rand non-repayable grant. That's the first thing you are applying for. And then you are entitled to apply for an unsecured, favorable interest-bearing loan of between 250,000 and 1 million Rand. Unsecured, favorable interest-bearing loan of between 250,000 and 1 million Rand, and that the amount, the quantum that you will eventually qualify for is totally dependent on your motivation and justification. So the loan is a structured repayment period loan of 60 months, 5 years. So you will repay the loan back over a 5-year period. The first 12 months, there is no interest which is charged. And in the first 12 months, you're not required to pay that loan back. So you get a 5-year loan, which is repayable from month 13 onwards. The first 12 months, there is no interest charged on that loan, and you are not expected to repay anything in the first 12 months. Interest becomes payable from month 13 at the prime rate once the business is on its feet. Now, this is very interesting. This has been included in the criteria. It reads as follows. It reads that if it takes you longer than a year to get on your feet, then in fact the interest-free period will be extended for that period on a case-by-case basis, number one. And number two, potentially that 5-year period would then be extended for period of the extension that it does take you to get back on your feet. What it is also silent and quiet about, but I'm sure that there will be additional documents and the final contract or memorandum of agreement you will be asked to sign. What I'm sure and certain about is that it will also talk about the fact that if you never get back on your feet again, what are you to do? The moment I have more clarity on that, the moment we have more clarification on that and clarification documents on that, I will let you know. It could be anything from, well, we might write the loan off, to we will extend the repayment period. But as things stand at this moment in time, I think that I want to go back one more slide and say the loans are unsecured. You are not required to put up personal surety for these loans. So you're entitled to a loan of up to 1 million Rand depending on your motivation and your true need. It is unsecured. You are not charged interest for months 1 to 12. You only start interest only starts kicking in from months 13 onwards, and from months 1 to 12 there is no repayment obligation on that loan. This is extremely generous. I'm sure you will all agree. It is extremely generous of Johan Rupert to have done this. The money can be used to cover payroll, rental, and other monthly operating overheads. Payroll, rental, and other monthly operating overheads. So when you do your motivation, when you put your motivation together, you're going to have to bear in mind that you need to break it up into these categories and show why you need the money to cover these activities. I just want to very quickly look at the questions. Michael Block says, don't you also have to supply management accounts or financial statements? Michael, there is a full list. We're going to go into the list of what you have to supply in the application process. Larry says, what is defined as get back on your feet? Larry, at this moment in time, it is not defined. It is simply in the documents. As soon as we have more information in that regard, I will get back to you. Conrad says, SMEs are defined as a company that not subsidiary company. We are held by investment companies. Are we still SMEs? If you're separately registered businesses, each business within a group is entitled to apply in its own right. And I will talk about that a little later. David Levine says, do you have to present a budget David, I will go through all of the documents you have to put together, and there's a lot of documents. I have 3 slides dealing with the documents you have to put together. I will get to that in a minute. Brian says, so if your business has a revenue of 100 million, but is in distress due to COVID-19, no, Brian, this is one relief scheme. This is not the government relief scheme. This is a private relief scheme funded by Johan Rupert. I am certain that there will be additional government relief schemes. Certainly they have been announced by the Minister of Small Business on the one hand, by the Minister of Trade and Industry on the other hand. This is just the first program that has been released, and this is specifically for companies doing less than 50 million rand. FK says, what happens if I can manage to pay back by month 13? Will it be interest free? FK, I am certain that you will be able to negotiate with business partners an absolute interest-free process if by month 13 you're able to pay that loan back. I'm certain of that, because there's absolutely no compunction on them wanting you to hold on to that money, because remember, the purpose of the fund is to keep giving that money out to more qualifying businesses. So certainly I don't think that is a question at all, FK. Aggie says, does this also apply to advocates and other sole trading professionals? It applies to all consulting, any consulting businesses, any service businesses, Aggie. It's across the board. Trevor says, will these slides, yes, I will make the slides available to everybody, Trevor. Thank you for that question. Okay, so Sukuma for closed corporations, companies, and trusts. To qualify, the business must be formally registered. The business must provide evidence of financial viability before COVID-19, and the business must be both tax and regulatory compliant. Now, we need to remember that the objective of the initiative is to provide cash flow relief to qualifying closed corporations, companies, and trusts. The money can be used to cover payroll, rental, and other monthly operating overheads. If I own more than one business, can I apply for more than one? Absolutely. You can. Each business is assessed on its own merits. However, priority will be on supporting as many business owners as possible. All right, so let's go over the documents that you're going to require. And please don't have a heart attack, because in your ordinary course of running your business, these things should be available. Remember, now we're not talking about sole proprietors. We're talking about companies, corporations, and trusts. Interesting question by David D. Will this apply to a new co started in January 2020? January, February, March. Certainly, David, I would imagine you're in a good position to apply if you've got running accounts up until the end of March. So let's go through what you need. Number one, annual financial statements for the financial period ended 28th of February 2019, which was last year, signed off by your accountant. Now remember, that's not Johan Rupert's rule. That's a rule of the country, that you're not an operating business. You're not a business in good standing. You haven't regularized your affairs if you have an outstanding February 2019 AFS. Management accounts for the period 1st of March 19 until 31st of December 2019. David, to some extent that answers your question, but I would imagine you're still in a good position to apply. So management accounts, if you don't have your AFS, up until the 31st of December. The latest available EMP 201 document submitted to SARS, not older than 3 months. Those are your PAYE returns, essentially. 3 months bank statements of the business for the period 1st of December to 29th of February to assess operation before the lockdown. Remember, the onus is on you to show that you locked down, that you didn't go out of business before the lockdown, that you didn't close your business before the lockdown. A rental statement not older than 3 months for your premises. The statements for any other credit agreements, such as asset finance or trade finance loan agreements, as of the 31st of January 2020. The kind of thing that you would ordinarily have to have in your business if it's a trading, closed corporation, trust, etc. And then the most important component of the entire application. The most important component of the entire application is this: motivation and supporting documentation clearly illustrating your distress as a result of the lockdown. So you have to show, you have to talk about, you have to write an essay essentially about the fact that you're in distress. You've had to lock down, your company's in distress, you can't pay your bills, you can't pay your staff, you can't pay your rent, etc. The motivation can cover the following information. Your turnover has reduced. Well, if you're in lockdown, your turnover certainly will have reduced. Your working capital has eroded. You've had to take your capital and you've had to fund the business from it because your turnover has reduced. You have an inability, or it's difficult to pay wages and to keep jobs in your organization. And there you can claim the fact that, we've not engaged in the Section 189 process, but unless we get some kind of help, we are going to have to retrench employees. The inability to pay rent, inability to pay for other overheads. And you should be in a position to show that. Inability or difficulty in servicing existing debt obligations. So we had an overdraft, or we had a bank loan, or our properties bonded in one way or another. We've not been able to pay the bank. As much of that kind of information that causes business partners to sit up and say, you know what, this company is really in distress, and if we don't help them out and they go out of business, 10 people can lose their jobs. And that's the motivating reason why Johan Rupert put this thing together in the first place. Because he didn't want businesses to go out of business, and he didn't want people to lose their jobs because of this lockdown. Monique says staff and bookkeepers are away from the office. I appreciate that, Monique, but you have to do everything you can on an affirmative basis to try and get this information if you want to make the application. Sherry says, if a client has already applied for debt relief for small business through the government, can they still? There's absolutely no exclusion in the rules or in this document. There is no exclusion or in this document for any of that, Sherry. So if it is a case that you've applied previously, make the application here as well. There's absolutely no exclusion at this moment in time. Statement of assets and liabilities for the main business owner. Copies of IDs of all directors, shareholders, members, and trustees. Those are your CIPC documents. Copy of marriage certificate, including your nuptial contract, divorce certificate, or death certificate, if applicable, of either one of your spouses or, in fact, of any of your shareholders or directors. All of your CIPC documents. Copy of your registration certificate. Copy of your memorandum of. Now, these are all things you have to already have. So it should basically be just finding these documents. Copy of the company's share register, your share register, your memorandum of incorporation, your registration certificate, your CIPC documents are all there when you register your business. Your founding statement, if you're a closed corporation, your trust documents, a copy of any of the trust deeds in the business, copy of your master's authority certificate, copy of all IDs of all trustees in a trust, and confirmation of bank account details issued by relevant bank. Now, not all of these documents are going to be required. It's the ones that you can have available, and it's the ones that apply to your business, ladies and gentlemen. If there are documents, then business partners will come back to you and say, we can't process your application further until such time as you submit the following documents to us. They tend to be very reasonable in that regard. And I've seen some pretty negative comments about business partners, but at the end of the day, remember, business partners have a fiduciary responsibility to their funders, whether their funders are Johan Rupert or the government. And so they have a PFMA responsibility, public finance responsibility if they're in the public sector. But in this sector, they would have a very stringent contract in terms of how they're supposed to manage his money. Bank account details issued by the relevant bank. You need a letter, a confirmation letter from your bank to that effect, ladies and gentlemen. So please just ask your bank now for that letter. It's actually, the majority of banks, you can apply for it online. Okay. The things you need to know about the Sukuma business loan that you need to consider. Number one, no industries are excluded from receiving the loan. So no industries are excluded from receiving that loan. The grant and the loan are coupled. If you are rejected for the loan, you will lose the 25,000 Rand grant. The grant and the loan, they are coupled. If you are rejected for the loan, you will lose the grant. This doesn't apply to sole traders because remember, sole traders don't qualify for the loan. They only qualify for the grant. Sole proprietors. But in case of companies, corporations, and trusts doing less than 50 million Rand a year, if your business is rejected for the loan, you will lose the grant. They are coupled. Once approved, your first payout will be made within 7 working days of your application. So it will be made within 7 or a week and a half of when your application is received and it's complete. Thereafter, your approved financial aid will be paid to you over a 3-month period. So let's say you've applied for 900,000 Rand. You will be paid 300,000 Rand at the end of each of the months for the first 3 months of that loan, subject to you submitting documents monthly which support your continued need for financial aid. So you do have to, for the period of those 3 months, you do have to justify that you've spent the money on what you said you were going to be spending the money on. And so they've staggered the payment period of the loan to you over a 3-month period, during which time you have to have developed the habit of proving or showing or evidencing that you're spending the money on what you said you would spend the money on, that there is validity to your application, to your claim, and not that you've gone off and bought a BMW. David, is this 3 equal monthly advances? Yes. So they will take whatever you've been granted as a loan and they will divide it into 3 months. Remember, you will get your grant within 7 days of your application. So your first 25,000 Rand grant you will get within 7 days of your application. But then if you've applied for another 900,000 Rand as a loan and you've qualified, you will get 3 equal payments of that 900,000 Rand, unless you have a motivation or a justification for why you need them to be unequal payments, in which case you would make the application on a case-by-case basis to business partners. And if they have the flexibility, they will make a plan in your regard. If they've got a flexibility, they'll make a plan in your regard, David. Leslie says, where do you submit all the documentation? Okay, so Leslie, just as with the sole proprietor grant application, I posted the link. I'm going to show you a link now on an additional slide. And remember, all of these slides will be made available to you. Thank you for that question. Right, so the online link to make application is this link over here. And what I'm going to do now, do not be surprised, ladies and gentlemen, who have received the invitation. Do not be surprised when you now get another email, even though you know the webinar is complete. When you get another email now, because at the bottom of the email, the link will be posted as well as this presentation will be posted. So I'm using the same distribution list as the original invitations to send you the link and this presentation. So the first 25K of each loan is regarded as a grant automatically. No, the 25,000 Rand, David, is not a loan. It is a grant. You qualify for the grant. The loan is over and above the grant. Robin Zinman says, does business partners have capacity to process all applications? Robin, I don't know. I assume they do. And I assume that a lot of this process is now going to be automated, that they have staffed up. So if Johan Rupert has given R1 billion to them to administer this scheme, you can be certain that he has given additional administration funding to them, or that the government has at least given the administration funding. John Curry, can you take a loan of less than 250K? Well, the minimum loan is 250K, John. But again, I would imagine that you can engage with business partners on a one-to-one basis and ask them that question. I am trying to get to interview business partners. If I do manage to get to interview them, I will create a podcast and I will send the podcast out to you with clarification, ladies and gentlemen, on all of these questions. Jacques says, what if one partner does not qualify for loans previously at banks due to previous judges? Jacques, from the way I mean, it's a good question. The way I see it, this is about the ability of the business to remain operating and after lockdown to get back on its feet, rather than a focus on any of the directors or partners. Whereas surety is not required, it is therefore completely based on the credibility of the business itself as a legal entity rather than on the individuals. However, there might be additional contractual undertakings in the case that you mentioned, Jacques, only because of the fact that there is no guarantee that that repayment is going to be able to happen unless what you're suggesting takes place. That all of the directors are actually able to not secure, but at least guarantee that that repayment will take place. So it is very, very definitely and very certainly worth mentioning that that's something that we need additional clarification on. It's a beautiful question. Thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's very much at this stage about trial and error. It's about the art, not the science, of making this application. As you experience things, be them positive or negative, please continue to send me information on the WhatsApp number that you've sent me your original request on, so that I can make that known to everybody involved in these discussions, so that everybody can benefit from what you're experiencing, both good and bad. O'Neill, you're asking, please could you clarify on the subsidiary question? Well, O'Neill, look, the bottom line is this, and the document actually says this. It says each business entity which is registered, which has its separate book of accounts, which has its own annual financial statements, each business entity is entitled to apply ab initio, from the start, from scratch. You can have it. So let's say you've got 10 businesses within your group, and each of them are separately registered, separate income centers, separate cost centers with separate books of accounts. You can apply for each of them individually, even though there are common directors. And it says that specifically, even though there are common directors and one owner has more than one business. It says that we would like as many owners to benefit, but we will not exclude multiple businesses from one owner. So you need, I hope that answers your question. Is there an opening date? Opening date is today. So John, opening date is today in terms of when you can start to apply. Laura says, if you applied for the next 8 months but had to stop operating after the first announcement. Well, Laura, you're actually asked there to show how you're using your capital. So in other words, the presumption is that you do not need to use your capital and you can qualify for a loan to avoid having to eat into your capital. That's the whole point of this. So in answer to your question, very definitely apply, and in your motivation say, I've only got funds for this period of time. We don't want to eat up those funds, because what if the lockdown is extended, etc., etc., etc. That's the whole point of this fund. Can you confirm if there are turnover requirements again? Zaffa, the bottom line is these are for small businesses, so it is for a business doing not more than 50 million rand, although I imagine that business partners will reserve the right to restrict that amount based on two things: based on the number of claims or that are in fact put through the system on the one hand, and based on the fact that maybe they secure another billion or more from other donors out there, even government, to complement the fund, because it is a successful fund. So I hope I've answered your question, Zafar, in that regard. Is there a closing date for the application? No, Trevor, at this stage it's ongoing. There isn't a closing date. I would imagine, and the reason I changed the time of this webinar from 3:30 this afternoon to 9 o'clock now is I would imagine it's very much a first come, first serve activity. And if the money runs out and there isn't supplementary money, then it will be that billion rand and nothing more. So the point I'm trying to make is get in early, get your documentation, send what you've got with a motivation that even your book, and Monique, this applies to you as well, with a motivation that your bookkeeper, that your accountants are not available, but here are the documents I have, will they suffice? You will then enter into a dialogue with whoever is appointed to manage your case at Business Partners. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for participating. I will make the link available, and good luck on that. And please let me know how it's going. Please let me know if you've been successful. Please let me know if you've not been successful and why. And let's just keep the dialogue open to see if we can be of service to you. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention. And yeah, just keep going, guys, and try remain positive. Try attend our webinars.